Prior to the introduction of Western rulers, Western media, and Western invasions, governments all over the world looked after their own countries, managed their own issues, and provided enough care for their people. There was a time when people satisfied their fundamental requirements and went about their everyday activities cheerfully. It was regarded as a tribal world or developing world in the West. You described a morally reprehensible world and people. Do you remember? You proceeded to begin the invasion. Your attacks began in Australia and shifted to countries like Belize and Guyana. They believed you were bringing civilization to those countries. However, you destroyed the natural resources of these countries and enslaved their people. You have completely looted all of the livestock, wild meat from mammals, and unusual artifacts from African countries' gold deposits. Rather, some countries were so devastated that they could never be restored. You went to Asia and grabbed all of the pearls from those people. Looters stole antiquities dating back hundreds of years. Children, pregnant women, and clergy were all brutally killed. You went to Australia. Everything was looted, including charcoal. Next, you traveled to several American countries. You abandoned those countries and departed when there was nothing else to do after plundering everything. You asserted that you granted independence to those countries. But all you did was take everything from there and just leave it. Do you remember them? The next step is to keep a watch on both the countries under your authority and other countries. You couldn't afford to wait for a country to grow. You intended to destroy those countries. You set up distinct organizations for it. They began to demonstrate that those groups were founded for the sake of global security and human growth. But you never worked to safeguard the safety and growth of the world's people. If you had done that from the beginning of those organizations, the world would be a far better place now. We will offer examples of just a few modern-day countries that you have destroyed.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours.
These are Arabs who are going to welcome us as liberators.
Who will govern Iraq when Saddam Hussein is removed?
Iraq, which was born with mineral oil resources, has begun to develop as a result of those resources. The West could not stand you. Saddam Hussein, the leader, was putting plans in place to elevate Iraq to a position of prominence in the world. The United Kingdom, like the United States, accused Saddam Hussein of manufacturing biological and chemical weapons.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb.
Nuclear weapon.
Mobile production facilities.
We know he's got chemical weapons.
However, you wished to land in Iraq, for you intended to apprehend al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden. Finally, Saddam Hussein, the architect of Iraq, was apprehended and murdered. Iraq, which was once a lovely country, has been reduced to rubble and cannot be rebuilt even now, and you have left Iraq. You did not leave anyone in the world wondering why so-called human rights organizations, UN organizations, and non-governmental organizations do not speak out against this heinous act.
لا شك كذابين، أي كذابين لأنه هم دمروا العراق ذول الاثنين، بير وبوش، هم رجعونا للصفر، يمكن أقول لك رجعنا للقرون الوسطى وأكثر. أنا لو مجرم يعني أقتلهم بداية.
Libya is the country that belongs to Gadaffi. Until about a decade ago, you could say that Gadaffi was Libya. Libya was a highly powerful state a decade ago, as we all know. Muammar al-Gaddafi controlled Libya for 40 years and oversaw an authoritarian administration. The Western conspirators who pretended to want political freedom and democracy angered the Libyan people. Libya's economic growth rate was 10.5% in 2010, when Gadaffi was assassinated. Libya's GDP growth rate for 2022 was -1.24% last year. Finally, Western leadership, the media, civil organizations, and non-governmental organizations have wrecked Libya and the Libyan people's future. Afghanistan and Syria. According to a social media video, US presidential contender John McCain visited ISIS leader Abu Bakr Baghdad in 2013. Nonetheless, the United States has never rejected that accusation. Baghdad then launched terrorist strikes in 2014. We are not claiming that the major goal was to destabilize Syria's government under Bashar al-Assad. However, Senator Rand Paul of the United States published it. The eventual effect was that Syria and Afghanistan were entirely destroyed. Even now, no Western country, civil organization, or non-governmental organization has been able to improve the living conditions in these two countries.
Finally, understand that not only terrorism but also counter-terrorism may have produced the monster that we are facing.
Furthermore, the Western authorities' systematic efforts to create anarchy in several nations, such as Venezuela and Pakistan,
इंशाल्लाह जो आखिरी फैसला होगा वो अवाम का होगा। इस जमहूरी निज़ाम में जो आखिरी आवाज़ होगी वो अवाम की होगी और अवाम की आवाज़ जो है वो इमरान खान है।
We have not forgotten the cruel Western mafia's objective to ignite a war between Ukraine and Russia. They are, however, unwilling to take any action against Russia. The reason for this is fear of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Behaving like hairy lions in the face of small countries, these mafia gangs shrink like little rodents in the presence of leaders like Putin, adopting a double standard. Now, it's time to get to the primary point of this video. Channel 4 just presented a clear lie about the Easter assault in Sri Lanka. We're creating this video because we need to respond appropriately. We noticed that Western authorities, human rights organizations, and puppet media dancing to the West are mostly responsible for Sri Lanka's devastation because of the tremendous assistance they offered to the 3-decade-long civil war that terrorized the Sri Lankan people. During that battle, in which over 30,000 Sri Lankans were slaughtered, the terrorists got major assistance from Western powers. However, Sri Lanka's leader, who assumed power in 2005, refused to submit to Western forces. In 2 years, he was able to bring the struggle against terrorism that began in East Marvel, Aru to a conclusion at Nandikadal Lagoon. However, near the end of the war, Western operatives, like Miliband and Kushner, exerted significant influence on Sri Lanka's leader. The pawns danced with the money of those forces, and even in the Sri Lankan parliament, the insults rose. Towards the end of the war, they fought the budget in parliament, and even sought to overthrow the government. All of those efforts, however, were stopped due to the luck of the Sri Lankan state as well as the ruler's tact. The world's most dreaded terrorist organization, the LTTE, was crushed in 2009, and its commander, Vilapillai Prabhakaran, was killed by the army. Thousands of Tamils who had been detained as human shields for the terrorist leader's protection were successfully freed by the Sri Lankan army at the last moment. The mission was known as the Humanitarian Mission. The dawn of peace broke across the entire island of Sri Lanka, bringing an end to 30 years of bloodshed. But one major issue remained. Western leaders, human rights organizations, civil organizations, and non-governmental organizations have an everlasting hatred for the leader of Sri Lanka who did not listen to what they said. Following that, Sri Lanka's leaders devoted close attention to the country's development. The entire country was one large working field. Roads were constructed throughout the country. Electricity is available in 98% of the country. Instead of child soldiers picking up guns in the north, the sight of youngsters was refreshing. Instead of bombed-out rails, Sri Lanka now has a railway system that connects the country's 4 longitudinal halves. Instead of outdated classrooms, playground schools now have laboratories with sophisticated facilities. Our country now has a highway system for the first time in history. Alternative ports and airports have begun to be constructed. Universities have grown in size. The rulers were successful in putting an end to the phrases unemployed graduates and border villages. Massive communication initiatives, such as the Lotus Tower, and massive investment projects, such as Port City, were completed. Sri Lanka's economic growth rate surpassed 6%, making it Asia's second largest economy, trailing only China. The final city, Colombo, was named the world's fastest growing city. As it turned out, the so-called Western conspirators and their organization were unable to remain silent. Old behaviors reappeared. Plans to anarchize Sri Lanka's growing economy have been initiated once more. Recently, Station 4 used the same station that has been disseminating misinformation to conduct surveys on war crimes. Their money was donated to international human rights NGOs and civil society organizations that supported the Dancing Puppets soundtracks. False accusations were used to file cases in Western nations' courts. At the time, they launched a large misinformation campaign against the country's leaders over the internet. They were successful in their objectives in 2015, and Maitripala Sirisena became president and the new dictator. Projects for development were halted. A country that was once a place of employment has now become a wasteland. The people of the country were so fed up with that rule that in the local government elections held at the beginning of 2018, the party of the leaders from 2005 to 2015 won a landslide victory. Western powers had re-entered the fray. This local government election outcome made them realize that a political force they cannot see and despise is regaining power in Sri Lanka. They believed that this could not be accomplished within the borders of the country. It was a blessing for these terrorist Western forces that the ruler who ruled the country at that moment became their pet. The plans were successful. ISIS, on Easter 2019, a Western puppet detonated 6 suicide bombs, transforming our beloved motherland into a pool of blood. This devastation, which could have resulted in a major ethnic conflict, was averted thanks to the patience of the educated Sri Lankan people. Domestic and foreign intelligence services had already issued warnings about this attempt. The State Security Council meeting, which was scheduled before the incident, was rescheduled. 3 days before the incident, a member of the then president's staff posted a scathing message on social media. At the time, a cabinet minister stated that his father had cautioned him not to attend church that day. Despite warnings from local and foreign intelligence agencies, the country's president was out of the country on the day of the attack. At the time, the defense secretary told the reporters, "We knew they'd attack, but we didn't think they'd attack like this."
Who you believe carried this out?
There are so many information moving here and there and saying that the defense ministry was aware of it, and well, we knew certain things were happening, but this country is truly democratic today. There is no emergency laws, nothing. So there is hardly anything that we also can do. We can go to a certain extent, collecting information and things like that,
What did your intelligence warnings say?
Small group, but very well organized and powerful, was responsible. And so most of the findings, I will not be able to disclose because, still we are doing it. And your FBI is with us today, and the same way the Interpol is coming tomorrow. And we are going to dig into this fully.
You issued a warning, you had intelligence.
We had to a certain extent, but it's a little vague.
But why wasn't the church protected? Why weren't all the churches protected?
We have alerted related agencies, and now, for example, even during the height of the war, right, we never provided security for the hotel. Hotel security was looked after by their own security. They always hired a senior military officer or a police officer, and they looked after. And when something like this happened, they say, they didn't do anything. We even in the future, we are not going to look after the hotel. They have to, they are earning, they are very lucrative, and they have to look after their security. We are here to secure the security of the public, general public, and the property.
Why weren't the churches protected if you had a warning?
How many churches to be protected? But we informed that there is we never expected an attack of this magnitude.
But you had warnings about a suicide bomber.
Not to this extent. It's a isolated, maybe one or two attacks here and there and various things. We never expected it to be so big.
Needless to say, even anyone would have the ability to understand that this attack was a state-sponsored event with Western influence. The economic growth rate of 6.2% in 2014 had fallen to 2.1% in 2019. National security has deteriorated to nothing. By 2019, we had a Sri Lanka governed by the underworld and drugs. Furthermore, dissatisfied citizens voted for state leaders from 2005 to 2015, and they were re-elected. With the election of Gotabaya Rajapaksa as president in 2019, Western forces entered and implemented their own objectives. Exactly 1 week after the new president was appointed, the Swiss embassy in Sri Lanka received a complaint that a lady named Srilatha Pereira, alias Gania Barrister, a Sri Lankan employee of the Swiss embassy, had been abducted and sexually assaulted. The Western media prioritized and spread this news, and the international community was told that the new Sri Lankan administration is a terrible government that violates human rights. However, at the conclusion of the investigation, ITWAS found that she had not been abducted and that the incident was staged by Western embassies and Western media in order to humiliate Sri Lanka and the government in front of the international community. So far, foreign forces, non-governmental groups, and pro-Western media organizations operating against the country have failed and have reached a critical point. They chose anarchy in Sri Lanka over war in 2009, elections in 2015, and terror in 2019. They were drawn into the plan to incite an insurrection within the country and assassinate the president. Sri Lanka as a country was in a lot of trouble. In 2022, as a result of the COVID period, the influence of the world economic crisis that followed, and the economic risks this country had encountered by 2019. Under the pretense of that circumstance, they were able to stage a highly effective people's rebellion in the face of Western powers' unlimited money pouring. They aided the rebel leaders by bestowing substantial privileges on them. They carried out their objectives covertly by instigating violence in specific locations, saving convicts through legal help, and inciting people to violence. Unlike in the past, the American ambassador made her remarks public this time. On the journey, one member of parliament from the government party was killed. Many more people's property and automobiles were destroyed. An assassination attempt on the prime minister was unsuccessful. Under the pretense of that circumstance, they were able to stage a highly effective people's rebellion in the face of Western powers' unlimited money pouring. They aided the rebel leaders by bestowing substantial privileges on them. They carried out their objectives covertly by instigating violence in specific locations, saving convicts through legal help, and inciting people to violence. Following the attempted assassination of the Prime Minister, another attempt was made to assassinate the President. This is where the incident changed course. They expected the administration to come up with a Gaddafi-style answer from the community. The President elected not to do so and instead withdrew. The assassination plot failed once more. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was Prime Minister until a month ago, was elected President. The President defeated the insurgents and returned the country to its correct place, turning a violent assassination plot by Western operatives into another, failed operation. 15 months later, the aforementioned Channel 4 video debuted with this surround. The 2019 Easter assault was blatantly directed towards the persons they accused of war crimes. However, with the exception of a few pro-Western individuals, the bulk of Sri Lankans have begun to remark against the film. In the final few minutes of the Channel 4 film, a lovely sentence is mentioned. Because it appears that the Rajapaksas are making a comeback in politics, we decided to create this video. All of these methods and practices serve a clear goal. However, the former revealer in that video has a letter circulating on social media about becoming an employee of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Sarath Kongahage, who made a comment on the video, had a press conference and addressed it. These are his thoughts on it.
Sirasa Madhye dan Hard Talk program එක කරන ෆරාෂ් ෂෞකත් අලි කියන මහත්මයා එංගලන්තයේ පුරවැසියෙක් දැනට අවුරුද්දකට පමණ පෙර ගිය අවුරුද්දේ මාර්තු මාසෙ විතර වෙන්න ඕන මේ අරගලේ යන වෙලාවේ මට කතා කරලා කිව්වා ඔබතුමාගෙන් ඉන්ටර්විව් එකක් ගන්න ඕන ටෙලිවිෂන් එකකට මම අහුවා මොන channel එකකටද කියලා ඊට පස්සේ කිව්වා ලන්ඩන් ITN කියලා මගේ ගෙදරට ආවේ බොරු කියලා එහෙම කියලා දිනයක් වෙන් කරගෙන සුදු ජාතිකයන් දෙන්නෙක් මගේ ගෙදරට අරගෙන ආවා මම සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම කිව්වේ මේක IS සහ මුස්ලිම් අන්තවාදීන්ගේ වැඩක්. මගෙන් ඇහුවා මේ මහින්ද රාජපක්ෂ මැතිතුමා 2005 ජනාධිපතිවරණය ජයග්‍රහණය කළේ කොහොමද 2010 ජයග්‍රහණය කළේ කොහොමද මං කිව්වා ඔහු තමයි ඒ වෙලාවේ හිටපු ජනප්‍රියම නායකයා. ඒ කෑලි දෙක විතරයි මේ channel එකේ පෙන්නුවේ. මේගොල්ලෝ සම්පූර්ණ ඉන්ටර්විව් කරනකොට හැමතැනම කිව්වේ channel 4 කියලා නෙවෙයි ආවේ මවුන්ට් ලිනියා හෝටල් එකකට ෆරාස් ෂෞකත් අලි සල්ලි ගෙවන්නේ channel 4 කියන එක හංගලා. මේ විෂුවල් ගත්තේ කොහොමද කාගේ ආකයිව් එකෙන්ද ඩෙෆිනිට්ලි ලංකාවේ රූපවාහිනී channel එකක් තමයි දීලා තියෙන්නේ දැන් ඔය බෑන් පෙන්නනවා අරවා ඒවා කවදාකවත් ඒගොල්ලෝ ඇවිල්ලා ෂූට් කළේ නැහැ ඒවා මේ channel එකකින් තමයි දුන්නේ ඉතින් මගේ මේ channel 4 එකේ සම්පූර්ණ විකෘති කිරීමක් කළේ මගේ කතාව සම්පූර්ණ විකෘති කරලා එහෙනම් එයා ඒගොල්ලෝ ඇවිල්ලා ගන්න ඕනේ දප්පුල ලිවේරාගෙන් මේක දප්පුලනේ මේක ඇවිල්ලුවේ විශ්‍රාම යන දවසට ඉස්සෙල්ලා දවසේ ඇවිල්ලා මේක ඊට පස්සේනේ මේ කාදිනල් උන්නාන්සේ මේක අරගෙන දුවන්න ගත්තේ Channel 4 එක සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම සහරන් නැහැ මෙතන. කිසිම කෙනෙක් නැහැ. සහරන්ලා නැහැ. ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂයි තව කීප දෙනෙක් තමයි මෙතන ඉන්නේ. පුදුම දේශපාලනයක් මේක.
We want to offer you, with a great video presentation, Channel 4, leaders of key Western nations, members of civic groups, representatives of non-governmental organizations, and media brothers of pro-Western foreign networks. Here is what the children of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, where the atomic bomb was dropped, think of the United States.
I went around Hiroshima and Nagasaki looking for people who hate America and I couldn't find any. I even asked nuclear attack survivors. This is what they said.
Do you hate America?
No, yes. It's very difficult. I hate the leaders at the time who decided to drop atom bombs. But I don't hate the ordinary Americans.
They don't hate because according to them, and this is important, peace does not flow from hate.
You like America? You hate America?
Yes.
You like America?
We have no enmity for you in our hearts, just like those tiny children. Hatred, according to Lord Gautama Buddha's teachings, cannot be quenched by hatred. Without hatred, hatred is soothed. So we feel sorry for you. We respectfully beg that you cease your efforts to anarchize Sri Lanka. We implore you to quit hating this lovely place. The choice is entirely yours. God bless you. Sri Lankans, don't die apart. Let us rise together.